The sun burned like a merciless eye over the dusty town of Copper Ridge, where Sheriff Marcus Kane walked his daily rounds. His boots echoed against the wooden planks of the main street as merchants hawked their wares and children played in the dirt. Kane had been keeping peace in this frontier town for 8 years, and today felt no different from any other. That morning, Kane noticed 3 strangers riding into town. The first was a young woman with fire-red hair tucked under a worn hat, her clothes practical but clean. She dismounted her horse with the grace of someone who had spent countless hours in the saddle. The second rider was an older man with silver whiskers and kind eyes, though his weathered hands suggested he knew hard work. The third was barely more than a boy, maybe 16, with nervous energy that made him fidget with his horse's reins. Kane watched them tie their horses outside Murphy's General Store. Something about their manner caught his attention. They moved with purpose but kept glancing over their shoulders as if expecting trouble to follow them into town. The sheriff decided to introduce himself. As he approached, he overheard fragments of their conversation. "We can't stay long, Sarah," the older man was saying to the red-haired woman. "They'll catch up eventually." "Just long enough to get supplies, Pa," she replied, her voice steady despite the worry in her green eyes. "Tommy needs food, and the horses need rest." Kane cleared his throat. "Good morning, folks. I'm Sheriff Kane. Welcome to Copper Ridge." The 3 turned toward him, and Kane immediately sensed their fear. The boy named Tommy stepped closer to the woman called Sarah, while the older man's hand instinctively moved toward his holster before stopping himself. "No trouble here, Sheriff," the older man said carefully. "Name's William Harper. This here's my daughter Sarah and my grandson Tommy. We're just passing through, need some supplies." Kane studied their faces. These weren't outlaws or troublemakers. They were scared people running from something. "Mind if I ask what brings you through our town? We don't get many travelers this time of year." Sarah exchanged a glance with her father before speaking. "We're heading west, Sheriff. Looking for a fresh start." Before Kane could respond, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. 6 riders approached at full gallop, their intentions clearly hostile. The lead rider wore a black hat pulled low over his face, and a silver badge glinted on his vest. "That them?" Kane asked quietly. William Harper nodded grimly. "Bounty hunters. They've been chasing us for 3 weeks." The riders thundered into town, causing women to grab their children and merchants to scatter. The lead hunter dismounted and approached Kane with arrogant confidence. "Sheriff, I'm Deputy Marshal Kane from Cedar Falls. We're tracking 3 fugitives who stole from a bank. That's them right there." He pointed at the Harper family. Kane looked at the so-called marshal, then at the Harpers. Something didn't sit right. Real lawmen didn't usually travel in packs like wolves, and this Kane character had cold eyes that reminded Kane of rattlesnakes. "You got papers proving that claim?" Kane asked. Kane's face darkened. "I don't need to show papers to some backwater sheriff." "Step aside." That sealed it for Kane. No real lawman talked to another officer that way. "I'm afraid I can't do that. This is my town, and I decide who gets arrested here." The tension in the air became thick as molasses. Kane's men spread out behind him, hands hovering over their weapons. Kane counted 6 against 1, but he'd faced worse odds before. "Pa," Tommy whispered to William Harper, "maybe we should just go with them." "No, boy," William replied firmly. "Running time is over." Sarah stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "Sheriff Kane, those men aren't real lawmen. They work for Jebediah Morse, a cattle baron who wants our land. When we refused to sell, he had his men burn our ranch and kill my husband. We've been running ever since." Kane felt anger rise in his chest. He'd seen too many good people destroyed by greedy men who thought money gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. "Is that true?" Kane asked Kane. Kane laughed coldly. "You going to believe some lying cowpunchers over a federal marshal?" Kane drew his gun in one smooth motion. "I'm going to believe what makes sense. And 6 men chasing 3 scared folks across the territory for a bank robbery that nobody reported doesn't make much sense to me. The standoff began in the middle of Copper Ridge's main street, with innocent lives hanging in the balance and justice waiting to be served under the burning desert sun. The silence stretched like a taut rope ready to snap. Kane kept his gun trained on Kane while calculating his chances against 6 armed men. Behind him, he heard Sarah Harper quietly telling Tommy to get behind the water trough. "Sheriff," William Harper said quietly, "you don't owe us anything. This isn't your fight." "Maybe not," Kane replied without taking his eyes off Kane, "but I took an oath to protect folks in this town. That includes visitors who haven't done anything wrong." Kane spat in the dirt. "You're making a big mistake, Sheriff. Morse has connections all the way to the territorial capital. Cross him, and you'll regret it." "I've regretted plenty of things in my life," Kane said calmly. "But standing up to bullies isn't one of them." The first shot came from Kane's right-hand man, a weaselly character with gold teeth. Kane dove left, pulling William Harper down with him as bullets whined overhead. Sarah Harper proved she wasn't helpless, producing a small pistol from her boot and sending lead flying back at their attackers. The gunfight exploded across the main street. Kane rolled behind a hitching post, wood splintering around him as Kane's men spread out to flank his position. From the corner of his eye, he saw Tommy Harper crouched behind the water trough, eyes wide with terror but staying put like his aunt had told him. Kane squeezed off 3 quick shots, dropping one of Kane's men and sending another diving for cover behind a wagon. But more gunfire erupted from the saloon across the street. 2 more of Morse's men had been waiting in reserve. 8 against 3, Kane muttered to himself. "I've had better odds playing poker with card sharps." Sarah Harper had taken position behind a wooden crate, her red hair now dusty and her face grim with determination. She fired methodically, making every shot count. William Harper crawled over to Kane's position, bleeding from a graze on his arm but still gripping his old Navy Colt. "Sheriff, there's something you should know," William gasped between shots. "Morse has been doing this all across the territory. Forcing people off their land, burning them out, sometimes worse. We're not the first family he's destroyed." Kane nodded, understanding the bigger picture now. This wasn't just about one family's land. It was about a pattern of corruption that stretched far beyond Copper Ridge. A bullet shattered the post inches from Kane's head. He needed to change tactics before they were overwhelmed. Looking around desperately, he spotted old dynamite stored behind Murphy's General Store, left over from when they'd blasted the foundation. "Can you keep them busy for 2 minutes?" Kane asked William. "I can try," the older man replied, checking his ammunition. Kane sprinted toward the back of the store, bullets chasing him every step. He grabbed 2 sticks of dynamite and some fuse wire, his hands working quickly despite the gunfire echoing around the building. Meanwhile, Sarah Harper had managed to wound another of Kane's men, but she was running low on bullets. Young Tommy surprised everyone by grabbing a handful of rocks and pelting the attackers, providing just enough distraction for his grandfather to change position. Kane lit the fuse and hurled the first stick of dynamite toward the wagon where 3 of Kane's men had taken cover. The explosion sent wood and metal flying, and, when the smoke cleared, only 1 man remained standing. "That's enough!" Kane roared. "Surrender now, or we start shooting civilians." To emphasize his point, Kane grabbed Mrs. Murphy, who had been hiding in her store's doorway. The elderly woman whimpered as Kane pressed his gun to her head. Kane felt ice water in his veins. This was exactly what he'd feared. Innocent people getting caught in the crossfire because he'd chosen to make a stand. "Let her go, Kane," Kane called out. "This is between us." "Drop your weapons and step into the street," Kane demanded. "All of you. Or the old woman dies." Sarah Harper looked at Kane with anguish in her eyes. "Sheriff, we can't let him hurt her because of us." Kane studied the situation carefully. Kane had made a tactical error by taking a hostage. He was now focused on Mrs. Murphy instead of watching his flanks, and his remaining men were distracted too. "William," Kane whispered, "when I give the signal, you and Sarah create a distraction.
Tommy, stay down no matter what happens.
Kane still had one stick of dynamite left. He lit the fuse and rolled it across the street toward Kane's position, but not close enough to endanger Mrs. Murphy.
The explosion would provide cover, nothing more.
As smoke and dust filled the air, Kane sprinted forward. William Harper and Sarah opened fire from both sides, forcing Kane's remaining men to take cover. In the chaos, Kane tackled Kane from behind, sending both men rolling in the dirt. They fought hand to hand, Kane proving stronger than Kane had expected. The fake marshal landed a solid punch that rattled Kane's teeth, but the sheriff had been in plenty of brawls before. He drove his knee into Kane's stomach and followed with an uppercut that left the man stunned. When the dust settled, 3 of Kane's men lay dead, 2 were wounded and surrendering, and Kane himself sat in the dirt with Kane's gun pressed to his head. "Now then," Kane said, breathing hard, "let's have a real conversation about who you work for and what Jebediah Morse has been doing to innocent families." 3 hours after the gunfight, Kane sat in his office interrogating the captured men while Doc Patterson tended to the wounded. Kane proved stubborn at first, claiming he was a real deputy marshal just following orders. But, when Kane threatened to wire the territorial governor, the man's story began to crumble like a house built on sand. All right, Kane finally admitted, slumping in his chair.
"Morse pays us to clear out farmers and small ranchers. But it's not just about the land, Sheriff. There's something bigger going on."
Kane leaned forward.
"What do you mean, bigger?"
"Railroads coming through," Kane said reluctantly.
"Morse knows where the track's going to run.
He's been buying up land cheap, then selling it to the railroad for 10 times what he paid.
Problem is, some folks won't sell."
The pieces fell into place for Kane.
This wasn't random violence against settlers.
It was a carefully planned scheme involving inside information about railroad development. Morse was essentially stealing people's futures for his own profit.
Sarah Harper had been listening from the doorway.
She stepped into the office, her face hard with anger.
"How many families, Kane? How many people has Morse destroyed for his railroad money?"
Kane avoided her eyes.
23 families in the past year. Maybe more. Morse doesn't tell us everything. William Harper, his arm now bandaged, joined the conversation.
"Sheriff, there's got to be someone higher up who can stop this."
"Morse can't be working alone." Kane nodded grimly.
"I'll send word to the territorial marshal's office.
But that could take weeks, and, meanwhile, Morse will keep hurting people."
Young Tommy, who had been unusually quiet since the gunfight, suddenly spoke up.
"What if we went after Morse ourselves? Made him stop?"
Kane looked at the boy with new respect. Despite his youth, Tommy had shown real courage during the fight.
But going after a powerful man like Morse would be extremely dangerous.
"Son, Morse has a small army working for him.
Plus politicians in his pocket. Taking him down won't be easy."
Sarah Harper straightened her shoulders.
"Maybe not easy, but necessary. We can't just run anymore, Sheriff. Other families are suffering because we haven't stood up to him."
Over the next several days, Kane found himself drawn into a plan more complex than anything he'd ever attempted. Using information from Kane and the other captured men, they learned that Morse operated from a fortified ranch 30 miles north of Copper Ridge. He kept detailed records of his land schemes in a safe at his main house. The plan they developed was risky but simple. Kane would approach Morse's ranch openly, claiming he wanted to negotiate the Harper family's surrender. Meanwhile, Sarah and William would circle around to the back of the property and try to locate evidence of Morse's railroad conspiracy.
Tommy would stay in Copper Ridge, much to his disappointment.
Kane had no intention of putting the boy in more danger than necessary.
"You sure about this, Sheriff?" William Harper asked as they prepared to leave. "Morse won't hesitate to kill a lawman if it serves his purposes."
Kane checked his weapons one final time.
"I've been thinking about that. But I keep coming back to something my old sergeant told me during the war.
He said sometimes a man has to do what's right, even when it's dangerous.
Especially when it's dangerous." The ride to Morse's ranch took most of the day.
As they approached the property, Kane was struck by its impressive size. Morse had built himself a small kingdom in the wilderness, complete with a grand house that would have looked at home in any eastern city. Armed guards patrolled the grounds, confirming what they'd suspected about Morse's paranoia. The man lived like a feudal lord, surrounded by hired guns and isolated from the consequences of his actions. Kane rode up to the main gate alone while the Harpers circled toward the back of the property. 2 guards stopped him, hands resting on their pistols. "I'm Sheriff Kane from Copper Ridge," he announced. "I need to speak with Mr. Morse about the Harper situation." The guards looked at each other uncertainly. They'd probably heard about the gunfight in town and weren't sure what to make of Kane's unexpected visit. After a brief conference, one guard escorted Kane to the main house while the other presumably went to alert Morse. Kane studied the layout carefully, noting guard positions and potential escape routes. Jebediah Morse turned out to be a tall, distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and expensive clothes. He greeted Kane in an elaborate study filled with books and hunting trophies, playing the part of a cultured gentleman. "Sheriff Kane," Morse said with false warmth, "I understand you had some trouble with my associates in your town." Kane kept his expression neutral. "Your associates were threatening innocent people, Mr. Morse. That's not something I can allow." Morse laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Innocent? The Harpers are thieves and murderers, Sheriff. They killed my foreman and stole cattle before fleeing." "Funny thing about that," Kane replied. "None of my contacts have heard anything about stolen cattle or murdered foremen. But I've heard plenty about families being burned out of their homes." The mask of civility slipped from Morse's face. "You're walking on dangerous ground, Sheriff. I have friends who could have your badge removed with a single telegram." Kane had been counting on Morse's arrogance to keep the man talking while the Harpers searched for evidence. But he could see the conversation was about to turn violent. Outside, gunshots suddenly erupted from the back of the house. The gunshots shattered the tense conversation in Morse's study. Kane immediately drew his weapon, but found himself facing 3 of Morse's men who had been waiting behind the curtains. The cattle baron smiled coldly as his trap became apparent. "Did you really think I'd meet with you alone, Sheriff? I've been planning for this conversation ever since my men failed to return from your pathetic little town." Kane kept his gun trained on Morse despite being outnumbered. "Where are the Harpers?" "Safe, for the moment," Morse replied. "Though that depends entirely on your cooperation. You see, Sheriff, you've become inconvenient. But you're also useful. A respected lawman's testimony about the Harpers' criminal activities would be quite valuable." More gunfire echoed from outside, followed by shouting. Kane hoped Sarah and William were managing to stay alive while finding the evidence they needed. The whole plan depended on exposing Morse's railroad conspiracy to the territorial authorities. "You want me to lie about the Harpers being criminals," Kane said. "In exchange for their lives." Morse nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Sign a statement saying they confessed to robbery and murder, and I'll let all 3 of you leave peacefully. Refuse, and none of you will see another sunrise." Kane pretended to consider the offer while calculating his options. 3 armed men in a closed room made for poor odds, but he'd noticed something important. The study's large window faced the back of the house, where the Harpers were supposedly trapped. "How do I know you won't kill us anyway?" Kane asked, moving slightly toward the window. "You have my word as a gentleman," Morse said with mock sincerity. Kane almost laughed. "A gentleman who burned families out of their homes and hired killers to terrorize the countryside. That's not worth much, considering what I know about your business practices." Morse's face darkened with anger. "You know nothing about the bigger picture, Sheriff. This territory is changing. The railroad will bring civilization, progress, prosperity. A few stubborn farmers are a small price to pay for that future. And you just happen to profit handsomely from that progress," Kane observed. "Of course I do. That's how progress works. Men with vision and capital create opportunities. The weak get swept aside." Kane had heard enough. He suddenly smashed the window with his gun and dove through the opening as Morse's men opened fire. Glass showered around him as he hit the ground hard and rolled behind a water barrel.
The back of Morse's house looked like a war zone.
Sarah Harper had taken cover behind a woodpile, exchanging shots with two guards while William Harper lay motionless near the back door. Kane couldn't tell if the older man was dead or unconscious, but there was blood on his shirt.
"Sarah!" Kane called out.
"Where's the evidence?"
"Got it," she yelled back, holding up a leather portfolio. "William found Morse's safe before they spotted us. Letters from the railroad company, payment records, everything."
Kane felt a surge of hope, but they still had to escape with the evidence intact. More of Morse's men were converging on their position from all directions. The main house erupted in activity as Morse's guards tried to surround them.
Kane sprinted towards Sarah's position, bullets kicking up dirt around his feet.
He made it to the woodpile just as one of the guards flanked them from the left.
Kane's shot took the man down before he could fire. "Is William alive?" Kane asked desperately.
"Barely," Sarah replied, tears streaming down her dusty face. "He took a bullet in the chest trying to protect me." Kane looked at William Harper's still form and made a decision that would haunt him for years. They had the evidence needed to stop Morse, but carrying an unconscious man would slow them down too much. They'd all die if they tried to save him. "We have to go now," Kane said grimly.
"William would understand." Sarah's face went white. "I can't leave my father."
"You can and you will," Kane said firmly. "Because staying here means his sacrifice was for nothing.
That evidence is the only way to save other families from what happened to yours."
More gunfire erupted around them. Kane grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward the horses they'd hidden in the tree line. Behind them, Morse's voice roared commands to his men, promising $1,000 to whoever brought back the portfolio. The escape became a desperate chase across the desert. Morse's men pursued them on horseback, determined to recover the evidence that could destroy their employer. Kane and Sarah pushed their horses to the limit, knowing that capture meant death. They reached Copper Ridge 3 hours later, exhausted and wounded but alive. Kane immediately sent telegrams to the territorial marshal, the governor, and every newspaper contact he could remember.
Within days, the story of Morse's railroad conspiracy spread across the territory.
The cattle baron's empire collapsed within a month. Federal marshals arrested him and most of his men on charges ranging from murder to fraud. The railroad company, facing a massive scandal, canceled their contracts with Morse and promised to deal fairly with legitimate landowners. Tommy Harper wept when they told him about his grandfather's death, but he also understood why the sacrifice had been necessary.
William Harper's final act had saved dozens of other families from Morse's greed. 10 years passed. Sheriff Kane continued protecting Copper Ridge, his reputation now legendary throughout the territory.
Sarah Harper married a good man and raised Tommy as her own son, building a new life from the ashes of tragedy. On a warm spring morning exactly a decade after the events at Morse's ranch, 3 figures appeared on the hill overlooking Copper Ridge. An older woman with silver-streaked red hair, a tall young man with kind eyes, and a distinguished gentleman with a badge marking him as a territorial judge.
Kane recognized them immediately as they rode into town.
Sarah Harper Blackwood, Tommy Harper, and Judge William Morrison, who had prosecuted Morse's case and become something of a folk hero himself. "Sheriff Kane," Sarah said with a smile that had taken 10 years to fully return, "we came back to thank you properly.
And to tell you something important."
She dismounted and approached Kane, who was now showing his own gray hairs but still walking his rounds with the same determination. "The territorial legislature passed a law last month," Tommy added, his voice now deep and confident. "They're calling it the Harper Protection Act.
It makes what Morse did a federal crime, with severe penalties." Judge Morrison nodded approvingly.
"Your stand in this town 10 years ago changed everything, Sheriff.
You showed that ordinary people could stand up to corruption and win."
That example spread far beyond Copper Ridge. Kane felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the desert sun.
Sometimes doing the right thing cost more than you wanted to pay.
But, sometimes, if you were very lucky, you lived long enough to see that the price had been worth it. The 3 lives he had saved that day had gone on to save many others, creating ripples of justice that spread far beyond what any of them could have imagined.